Before we start, a note for the millennial watching this who has kids. We see you. This video is not about you specifically. It is about a generation that is having fewer children, later, or not at all, at rates that have no precedent in modern American history. The US birth rate hit a record low in 2023, and millennials are the primary driver of that decline. And the reaction from older generations has been fairly consistent. They say, selfish, immature, you'll regret it. Who will take care of you when you're old? Don't you want a family? What are you waiting for? To which the millennial typically responds with something between a hollow laugh and a detailed breakdown of the cost of childcare in their zip code. Because the question isn't really why millennials don't want kids. The question is what kind of world they were handed to raise them in. Picture a millennial couple in their early 30s having the conversation. They want kids, or they think they do, or they think they're supposed to want them. They're not entirely sure which. They open a spreadsheet, not because they're cold or unromantic, but because the numbers are the only honest way to have the conversation. They calculate childcare, the career hit, the apartment they'd need to upsize, the student loan still outstanding, the emergency fund that doesn't quite exist yet. And then they close the spreadsheet and sit quietly for a moment. And one of them says, maybe next year. Next year has been the answer for 3 years running. Not because they don't want a family, because the version of family they were promised, stable, supported, financially manageable, keeps not quite arriving. And they are not willing to bring a child into a situation they can't confidently hold together. The easy answer is that millennials are selfish, that they prioritize travel and brunch and personal freedom over the hard and meaningful work of raising a family. And look, there's a grain of truth in it. There is absolutely a subset of millennials for whom the decision not to have children is primarily about lifestyle, about freedom, about not wanting the limitation. That's a legitimate choice, and it's worth saying plainly. Choosing not to have children is not inherently selfish. But framing the entire generational trend as a preference for avocado toast over parenthood is a way of avoiding a much more uncomfortable conversation. Because for the majority of millennials who are delaying or forgoing children, the decision is less about what they want and more about what they've been handed. And what they've been handed is a set of circumstances that make the already difficult decision to have a child feel, for many, genuinely impossible. To understand why, you have to look at the specific forces shaping this decision. Force 1, the financial math. Raising a child in the United States now costs an estimated $300,000 from birth to age 18 before a single dollar of college tuition. That number has increased significantly faster than wages over the past 2 decades. Childcare alone, for a single infant, costs more than rent in most major American cities. The average millennial is already managing student debt, stagnant wages, and a housing market that has largely priced them out of the stability that previous generations used as the foundation for starting a family. The financial case for having a child, when you are already financially precarious, requires a leap of faith that previous generations simply did not have to make in quite the same way. And a generation that learned early from watching their parents and from living through 2008 that financial floors are not guaranteed is not a generation inclined toward that particular leap without serious consideration. Force 2, the system failed. It is worth being specific about what the structural failure actually looks like. The United States is the only developed nation without guaranteed paid parental leave. Childcare costs have increased by more than 200% since the 1990s, with no corresponding increase in wages or government support. The maternal healthcare system produces outcomes that rank among the worst in the developed world. These are not lifestyle preferences, they are policy failures, and they land disproportionately on the generation currently of childbearing age. A millennial woman doing the math on what pregnancy, childbirth, and the first year of childcare would actually cost her, financially and professionally, is not being selfish. She is being accurate. Force 3, the existential weight. This one is harder to quantify, but it is real and it is significant. Millennials came of age during a period of escalating environmental anxiety, political instability, and a media environment that made it genuinely difficult to feel optimistic about the trajectory of the world. For a meaningful portion of the generation, the question of whether to bring a child into that world is not a trivial one. It is a question that gets asked seriously, at 3 in the morning, with genuine uncertainty about the answer. That is not nihilism, and it is not dramatic. It is what happens when a generation pays close enough attention to feel the weight of what they'd be handing a child, and takes that weight seriously enough to hesitate. Force 4. The identity shift. Previous generations largely understood adulthood as a sequence: education, career, marriage, children, in roughly that order, and on roughly that timeline. Millennials have systematically dismantled that sequence, not out of rebellion, but because the pieces stopped arriving on schedule. The career took longer, the housing came later, the marriage got delayed or skipped, and the children got pushed further down a list that kept growing. And somewhere in that delay, something shifted. A generation that had to build its identity from scratch, that learned to define itself through work and creativity and relationships and experience rather than through traditional milestones, discovered that the milestone itself wasn't necessarily the point, that a life without children could be complete, meaningful, full, which is, depending on who you ask, either a liberation or a loss. Probably both. Here's the honest version, because this channel doesn't get to only tell the flattering one. Some millennials are genuinely choosing freedom over family, and dressing it up in structural language because that framing is more socially acceptable. The finances are real, the system failures are real, the existential weight is real. But so is the fact that humans have always found ways to raise children under difficult circumstances, and that difficulty alone has never stopped a generation before. The decision not to have children is legitimate, but it is also worth sitting with honestly, rather than outsourcing the entire explanation to systemic critique. Some of it is the system, some of it is the spreadsheet, and some of it, for some people, is a preference that deserves to be named plainly, rather than justified endlessly. All three can be true at once. The generation that prides itself on authenticity deserves to apply that standard here too. So the next time someone asks a millennial why they don't have kids yet, and gets an answer that is either defensive or exhausted or both, understand what's underneath it. A generation doing genuinely difficult math in genuinely difficult circumstances about a genuinely irreversible decision. A generation that was told the floor was solid and learned it wasn't, and is not willing to hand that uncertainty to someone who didn't ask for it. A generation that takes the question seriously enough to not answer it lightly. Whether they end up having children or not, the seriousness with which they approach the question is not selfishness, it is care expressed before the person it would be for even exists. Even now, even still, somewhere, a millennial has that spreadsheet open, running the numbers one more time, trying to find a version that works,